Hi Justyna, here's the feedback from the reading part of the mock exam that you did recently, and you've scored the full 4 marks for your first question, so that's a good start. Moving on to question 2, where you are asked to comment on the language that the writer uses to describe the storm. You've made some excellent references to the terminology, where you said there's the metaphor, roaring Pacific Ocean, personification of the furious waves, and dying down, the pain or the pounding in his chest, and the adjective tangled, and then we got the noise from the storm. There's the list of nouns and verbs that the author uses to show how intense the weather is. So if we look quickly across at the mark scheme, what makes some use of subject terminology mainly appropriately. In fact, at level 3 makes clear and accurate use of subject terminology. So that's excellent there. And selects a range of relevant and textual detail. Well, again, your quotes are all relevant to the comments that you're making. The one thing that you possibly could improve on is the effects, the analysis of the effects of the writer's choice of language. You have attempted to comment on it, and you've done that quite well, where you've said that it is comparing it to a dangerous animal, and so he's creating tension and fear. So that's a good contrast there. Where here you just say that the author keeps the tense dark mood, and using tangle shows how significant the issue was for Alex. He can't stop thinking about it, and shows how intense the weather was. Help to imagine. So I think I would say it's probably 5 out of the possible 8 marks for this question, which is a good score. I think if you'd have gone a little bit more in depth into some of your explanations, it would have got you into the 6, or possibly even up to the level 4. So, you know, if you just said it, that by using the word roaring, you're comparing it to an animal, and you're suggesting that it's full of rage as it throws itself onto the ground, and then furious waves suggests that the water's really, really angry and aggressive as it's pounding against the ground, and it's deliberately assaulting the land. And then again, where you've said about the wind lashing the trees, it sounds as though the wind's whipping the trees around, trying to beat the ground into submission. So if you just said a little bit more along those lines, then you would definitely have been scoring in the top band for this question. But you've done really well on this question anyway, so well done. Okay, moving on to question 3, where you're asked to analyse how the text is structured to interest you as a reader. And if we look at the mark scheme, so if we look at this bottom point here, make some some use of subject terminology mainly appropriately. Where you do use the terminology for this question. So you say in the first paragraph, the author focused on Alex's dream, and then the second paragraph, and then the next paragraph, the reader's attention is transferred, and then next, and then describes the difference between that family, and then in the last paragraph, the author focuses on the memory of the mother herself, and then finally you say, by writing about the entire family, the author showed us how much the sickness of one can affect many. So you've definitely met the criteria for that bullet point at band. So if we look at the next bullet point, select some appropriate examples. Well, again, I think you have selected appropriate examples, because you've got one there about the sky heavy with dark clouds, where you're talking about the bird carrying off his mother, and then in here you've got some of the words from the description of the waves, and then here you're talking about the negativity of Alex And then in the air in the house felt heavy, and you've likened it to the sky in his dream, and like being at the bottom of the sea, you've compared it to the furious ocean. In this paragraph here, you've not put a quote in, but that would have been useful to have included a quote here, particularly the one where he's angry with everybody, including his mum, because that would have shown that would have backed up the point that you're making there. And then I like the bit here where you've said it describes the differences between Alex's family life before and after. You've given the quote about the party. Would also have been good, I think, to have included part of the quote where he's listing some of the things that his mum was like before she was ill and then afterwards, because that would have shown the contrast that you've mentioned there. And then the last bullet point in this one is attempts to comment on the effect of structural features. So again, I think you have attempted it, because here you said by writing about the entire family, the author showed us how much the sickness of one can affect many. So that's a clear attempt to comment on the effect of the structural features. And again here you said it shows how little they've realised how serious the case is at first. And here next the writer focuses on the rest of the family, showing us that Alex isn't the only one affected by the situation. So you have attempted. So I think that is 4 out of the possible 8 marks for this question. In fact, looking at it again, I think it is a level 3. I think it's, I'm going to give it 6 out of 8. Because you've said here, the second paragraph describes the weather outside and it was as grey and heavy as it was in his dream. And the reader's attention is transferred to Alex, his mood and his negative attitude, and the fact that his days were all as horrible since his mother got sick. So yeah, I think you've made a very good attempt at this question, so it's definitely 6 out of the possible 8 marks, so well done. Moving on to question 4, where you've been asked to what extent do you agree with the comment from the student that the part of the story set during breakfast time shows that Alex is struggling to cope with his mother's illness. Now here it says focus this part of your answer on the second half of the source from line 16 to the end. Unfortunately, a lot of what you have written has been based on the first part of the text, lines 1 to 15. So it's not relevant, and it's such a shame because you've made some valid and good points in there, and I think you would have covered all of the bullet points in that first part had that been the actual part of the text. So it's only here that we can start looking for the information for the answer. So you started off saying we can read how frustrated he is with this situation. He told his sister to shut up for asking an innocent question. He yelled at and then yelled at both of them. And then we can read about his anger. He was angry with his father, his sister's life in general, even his mother for getting sick, and he even rushed out of the kitchen ready to leave without breakfast. And your evaluation is that's a clear sign of how much negativity he had to face during these months since his mother got sick. And your analysis, he was tired, fed up and sad. All those feelings were hovering over his head, making it impossible for him to stop thinking about his mother's illness. So you've made some good points there. Then you've gone on to say that all the changes within the household couldn't make it better as his father can't cook. Would have been useful if you'd have put a quote in there. And then finally you've said the memory of the happy active mother who would find time and strength to paint for hours and then keep the house immaculate and still welcome her children after school with cookies. So the memory of her was still bright and alive, and it couldn't be easy to see her thin, sunken eyes and her eyes circled with shadows. So if we look at the mark scheme at level 2, so make some evaluative comments on the effects on the reader. Well, you've definitely done that. So we can see how frustrated he is, and then we read about his anger. And you said there's a clear sign. He's fed up. It's impossible for him to stop thinking about his mother's illness. And we can understand that it's not easy for him. Right. You've selected some appropriate textual references, although it would have been good if you'd put a quote in that paragraph there. And you have made some response to the focus of the statement. As you've said, it started off with this paragraph. Later on we can read how frustrated he is with the situation. He's angry. You said that's a clear sign of how much negativity he had to face during the months. He was tired, fed up and sad. Can't stop thinking about her. And it couldn't be easy to see her thin with sunken eyes and so on. So there's just this one, shows some understanding of the writer's method. So this is where you've shown how the writer has suggested to you that Alex is frustrated. So one clear way of doing it to make it brutally obvious to the examiner is to start off your sentence with the writer shows how Alex isn't coping by, but you have said later on we can read frustrated, and you mentioned the language that's used there, and then you said there's a clear sign, and then the memories. So I would say that you have shown some understanding of the writer's methods. I think you can develop that a little more. So I think in this paragraph here where you've said the memory of the happy active mother who would find time and strength to paint for hours, and you've compared it with how thin and her sunken eyes. So if you'd have said that the writer uses the comparisons between how she was before she got ill and how she was now, that would have been a clear indication of the writer's methods. And also if you'd have mentioned here, he uses dialogue between Alex and his sisters to show how he's not coping because he flies off the handle with his sisters. So you have got the understanding there. You just need to make sure that you show the examiner that you do know it. I can see that you can from there, but the examiner needs you to hit them over the head with it. So try and write the writer uses or the writer suggests and do it that way. So overall I think it is 10 out of the possible 20 marks for this question, so that's still a good score. So well done. And that gives you an overall score of 25 out of 40 for the reading part, so that's a really good score, so well done.